Hey everyone, I hope you're all having a nice start to the spring. I definitely am myself, and I've been doing a lot of good reading this spring, so I hope you have as well. It's definitely made my spring, I shouldn't say better than usual, but it's made my spring unique. All the reading I've been doing. So I'm trying something a little new today. Well, quite new for me, which is I was going to make a joke about how that's a first doing something new on this channel, but I actually have done something new once before I checked. But yeah, doing something new with my videos because normally I am here talking about one single book. And if you've been subscribed for any amount of time, you probably saw the thumbnail and you were like, which book is he talking about, and why is it not next to his head in the thumbnail? So I'm going to try something a little bit different today. Today there is not going to be a single book. Bottom line is I'm going to talk about several books today. So if you want to cut to the chase and just get to the books, I'll put a timestamp for you so you can get right to it. But I feel like some context could be useful to explain trying something new and really a different format, as I'm sure you'll be able to tell by my lack of comfort with coming up with all the stuff that I'm saying as quickly. But yeah, since starting this channel, I've pretty exclusively done full book reviews. Or more recently, I've been calling them discussions because generally that's what I enjoy most watching on other people's channels. And it's also what I enjoy making most. The whole process of mentally reviewing and analyzing a book after I read it, or while I'm reading it, probably over-analyzing, honestly. Just what stood out to me in the book, what were the impressions and the themes that take longer to emerge. Maybe on a rare occasion, if I've read the book before, like how is it different from last time I read it, or how is it different from other people's impressions of the book? Like that's where all the fun really is for me in making reviews. And it's also something that I think YouTube could use more of, despite that. I'm not saying I'm the only one doing it by any means. There are tons of great videos out there like that already, and I've been happy to discover all the time I'm discovering new people that are doing these dedicated full book reviews. And I think that it's really valuable to have a lot of perspectives out there, and just one review on a particular book, or even a few reviews, isn't, it's not a complete picture. You never quite get a complete picture. So I think it's really valuable to have all these different perspectives. Now, you might be thinking, Mike, how do you even know that's the kind of video you enjoy making the most? Because aside from the top 10 lists that I do at the end of the year, which is, I guess, actually that's the other thing that I do that I wouldn't really say it's been new because I consistently do it now, but it was new the first time that I did a top 10 list. So I guess I've done two new things on this channel. But I never do anything but full book discussion reviews. So how do I know that's what I like best? Well, that is a fair point, and it's part of why I want to try something new right now. The momentum of doing things the same way that's always worked for me well enough is strong, and it's hard to escape from this, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it attitude. It's especially hard for me because I script out my book discussions that I do, or my book reviews, not exactly to the word, but almost, to the word, really. I have scripts where I collect my thoughts. It helps me get a better grasp on what I'm reading, and just make sure that I'm using the time well in a way that is engaging for people, in a way that probably this video already is a little bit less engaging, and that's fine with me. That's what I'm trying to do differently here. But yeah, so maybe it's not broken exactly, but it does feel like it's a little bit stale at times, particularly because I'm reading a lot of other books, and I really appreciate a lot of these other books, and I'm pretty aware that, with the rate that I'm making my videos, which I admit is pretty slow, at least compared to when I started, it's going to be a while. Well, okay, it's not going to be a while. I'm never going to actually have full reviews on some of the videos. If you're an Agatha Christie fan, don't worry, I'm still going to do the Agatha Christie reviews eventually, even though I'm like 5 reviews behind on those or something. But I can't have time to review every single thing that I read that I would like to spend the time for. And, while I've never really been interested in making content that's just there to get views or that feels like it's treating books superficially, I also can say that there are plenty of booktubers that I really enjoy watching and I respect a lot who make successful videos beyond this one book, one video paradigm. So I guess this is my step into those waters. All right, let's be honest as well. There's another reason that makes this the time that I finally decided to do something a little different, which is I'll come out and admit it. I've been slow at getting my full dedicated book reviews lately, and that's fine with me. There's only so much time in the day, and I'm aware that I can't spend my entire life spend it all doing these book reviews, but I do hold these dedicated book reviews to a high standard, a pretty high standard, at least in terms of the discussion that I bring about them, what I say about it, like the thought that I put into them. So it takes me a while to produce them, probably more than it would seem just from watching them, because they're over in 15, maybe 20 minutes, maybe even shorter. So maybe that is a discussion for an entirely different video where all this time exactly comes from. But in general, it probably takes me a minimum of 5 hours to do a video from start to finish. And that might be for some of the Hercule Poirot books where I do, a 10-minute review on it. And sometimes it can take even a lot longer, like some of the history books that I've done where I really try to get more serious in the review about reading other resources and collecting information, maybe watching other videos. Now, I definitely could cut down on that, but I think it would start coming through in my videos as a lower overall quality and just lower coherence to the discussion, which I think for that style of video is just not a trade-off I want to make. But I don't think it has to be an either or. I have no intention of stopping making dedicated book reviews, but I also don't want this to stop me from talking about books here at all, because I don't want the moving books through my video pipeline to be the limiting factor towards having any discussion. So today, all I want to do is just chat about some books I've read so far this year, because there have been some good ones. I guess I'm going to call it a Friday Reads video, because that is the paradigm for what I'm doing essentially. I mean, I'm not actually going to do this every week, but I probably will do it again. And yeah, it's not Friday, it's Saturday. Hopefully it'll still be Saturday when I get this posted, because that's kind of the goal, to spend an hour making this instead of 5 hours spread across honestly 5 months as it sometimes is. Okay, so let's talk about some of these books. So let's see, I've read 10 books so far this year, which I'm not really, I'm not trying to read as many books as possible. I don't really think it can be motivating, but I don't really think that's something that in itself just alone is worth aspiring to. But I am keeping count of them on Goodreads. So all right, let's get to them. Actually, I think after I reviewed the list that I read, I realized there were a few other ones that I'll mention beyond those 10, because there are a few other ones that I'm in progress with right now, or that I just haven't logged on Goodreads. So I have these in sort of categories. That'll be probably pretty obvious. So let's get started. So the first book, all right, I'm not going through these in order. This isn't actually the first book I read this year, but I read some good mysteries this year. And some of those mysteries, 2 of them, have been from Ngaio Marsh at the recommendation of some of the viewers of my Agatha Christie videos. I decided Ngaio Marsh is very famous, I guess one of the queens of detective fiction from the golden age of detective fiction. So I read her first 2 novels. The first one, A Man Lay Dead, and the second one, Enter a Murderer. Now, both of those novels I actually am going to, well, I'm not going to promise, but I'm probably going to do a review of each of them eventually. I think I've actually written the review for A Man Lay Dead already, but I just haven't recorded it yet. I enjoyed these books. I think A Man Lay Dead felt very much like a first book, like a first novel. You could see how the author engages the reader and makes the setting interesting, makes the characters pretty interesting. But it felt like it was still like you could tell that she hadn't really perfected the craft yet. Not surprisingly, given that it was like her first out of, I don't know, 33 books, or maybe I'm making up that number, but the first out of a lot of books that, a lot of Roderick Allen detective books that she wrote. The second book, Enter a Murderer, that one I really enjoyed. That one, I felt like it made up for some of the downfalls of the first book, particularly just how the pacing in the first book had felt a little bit off. It felt like some of the characters and some of the side plots that were in at the end, you didn't really like. They just felt like they were kind of just there to pad the story out a little bit. In Enter a Murderer, I didn't feel like that at all. And Enter a Murderer is set in a performance of I don't know what the play is. I don't even know if it's a real play, but it's set in London at a stage performance, which is where the name comes from. So 2 books I really look forward to talking about. All right, another book that also was recommended by viewers, I think multiple viewers for sure, this one, and that I had heard about but was not really thinking about reading before, was 12 New Mysteries of Miss Marple. So this is taking the Agatha Christie character, Miss Marple, and basically giving 12, I think it's, well, okay, yeah, it's called 12 New Mysteries, giving 12 women's writers, mostly mystery writers who are currently active. I think some of them are not mystery writers, but many of them are, and giving them a chance to imagine their own short stories of the detective Miss Marple. And, you know, I was reluctant to start this one at first because I thought, you know, this is, it feels like, you know, it feels a little bit like a cash grab, and maybe it is, but it also, I felt like a lot of these characters, or not a lot of these characters, a lot of these authors really really came to some understanding. Like, it was clear that they appreciate the character of Miss Marple and what makes her a special character, and they were able to bring back some of that life of the original Miss Marple character with, in a way that, in the most successful stories, I wouldn't say all of them were great, but in the most successful stories, it feels like it's bringing this character who was originally conceived of, I want to say 70, well, 80 or more years ago, I think, at this point. And sometimes even placing her in a more modern, I don't know if they're exactly present day context, but in a more modern context, and just giving her some new life in a way that makes her, that doesn't feel like these stories are entirely imitative of, like it's just new writers trying to be Agatha Christie. Like, it feels like you can see their own style and perspectives coming through, which is something I really appreciate. Okay. Next category of books that I've been enjoying this spring is, or this winter, beginning of this year, is history books. And the first one of those is one that is not really properly a this year book, because I probably read 2/3 of it this year. I actually listened to it as an audiobook. Probably I never would have made it through otherwise. This is The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer, who is, he was a historian. He was not a historian. Sorry, I misspoke. He was a journalist who became sort of an amateur historian, or I don't know. I mean, he clearly did a lot of research. He was not a historian by profession, but he was a journalist covering Germany during the time of World War II, or the period of Hitler's reign known as the Third Reich. And this book was actually originally published in, I think, 1960, which is kind of crazy that that's now over 60 years ago. I have put a lot of time already into scripting out and putting together a dedicated review on this book. So I really hope that I actually do get to it, because I think this could be a really good one. And I think a lot of people will be interested in it. This is the one of the most popular history books ever, I guess, nonfiction history books, and yeah, it's really a captivating story. I think, it's I should have mentioned it's an extremely long book. The audiobook, I want to say it was like 55 hours long. So it puts it up there with the longest books that I've ever read. All right, I was trying hard not to do this video with any cuts, but we're going to do a cut there because I got too involved in talking about this book. Basically, great historical overview of the rise of the Third, like the conditions that led to the rise of the Third Reich, and then led to its decline as well. A lot of interesting geopolitics and just understanding of what the global situation was that led to all of this. Definitely would recommend it if it's the kind of thing that interests you. You'll probably know from reading the description about it if you want to take on a 55-hour work on Germany and the Third Reich, but definitely recommend it. There are some fair quibbles that you can have with, or maybe quibbles is too weak of a word. People might dispute many of the author's claims, especially a lot of them are fair given that the book was published in 1960, but there is a lot there to really learn from, especially given the context in which it was published. Okay, another book that I read that I'm not going to say too much about, but I found valuable. Also, I started last year, was Germany, A Nation in Its Time. I think the subtitle is, like Before, During, and After Nationalism by Helmut Walzer Smith. I thought this one was interesting, especially having just completed William Shire's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, in particular because, so the focus of this book is the period from 1500 to present day, really 2000, I guess. The period from when you could argue that Germany as a concept started to really exist at all, at least Germany as a nation in some sense, up to the present day, and how nationalism and the idea of the nation played a role in the development of Germany. And Helmut Walzer Smith is critical of this view that some historians have adopted that basically has said Martin Luther, from the time of Martin Luther, Germany was on this fixed trajectory, and there was something culturally about the people or the nationalism of Germany that would lead to the Nazi Party. The author is pretty critical of that point of view, as I think I am, without having a lot of background on the topic. I think I'm also pretty critical of it, just from what I know. But this is more of just kind of an overview of how that nationalism and the idea of the German nation developed over those 500 years. And when I say nationalism, I mean in, we often think of that in purely negative ways, or there's, in some contexts at least, especially when you see it as like leading to the development of the Nazi Party eventually, which was a nationalist party, of course. But, developing a sense of nationhood and a sense of identity, while it does involve separating oneself or one's own people from other people, that separation or that creation of a group identity is, powerful, and also has a positive influence in some ways as well, which is present during some of the period. Nationalism has its drawbacks for sure, especially as it gets later into the German story and comes closer to Nazism. But it's interesting just seeing the push and pull of nationalist ideas throughout Germany's history. Okay, I already said quite a bit on that one. Okay, next I want to talk about some philosophy books that I've been reading. The first one of those is the most accessible one, which is Sophie's World by Jostein Gaarder, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Actually, I don't really know. I'm just guessing. I would look it up if this was a full book discussion. So Sophie's World is about a girl named Sophie who takes a philosophy course, and that doesn't really sound like that much of a plot, and it kind of is a weird a weirdly constructed book that just kind of walks the reader through a series of philosophy lessons from, like, I guess I think it starts with Plato all the way up to well, actually, I guess it starts even a little bit earlier than Plato, all the way up to the present day. It's fast. It doesn't really dwell too deeply on any of those time periods, and the author tries and somewhat succeeds in making it into this sort of story about a girl who named Sophie, who is trying to understand the world in which she lives. So kind of cute and I don't know, whimsical in that sense. This is also is a book that I think it feels like you could read it as an adult. It feels sort of like a young adult book. Like it's definitely written in a way that's I think supposed to be accessible for, not really for kids, but definitely for teens. And I enjoyed it. I think especially as someone not having a ton of background in philosophy, I think it was a good introduction to a lot of this material, and a good recap of some of the philosophers that I actually do know a little bit about. So that got me interested and inspired to read a little bit more philosophy. So one additional philosophical work that I read was the Euthyphro by Plato, which is one of the Socratic dialogues. And that in this dialogue, Socrates is talking with a man named Euthyphro, and the question revolves around where the idea of goodness comes from, especially if you believe in the idea of a god, or a god or gods, as they did in Greek times. So, are things that are good because the gods like them? In which case, it seems a little bit arbitrary. Like if Zeus thinks that striking down people with lightning is something that he likes, then that means that striking down people with lightning is good. That's morally right. Okay, that seems a little bit weird. And they discuss that in the dialogue. On the other hand, if the gods like these things, like things that are good because they are good, if they like when you don't kill each other, if that's why that's good, then it would almost seem like the concept of goodness is prior to God, and therefore it's definitely a conflict if you believe in the gods as omniscient or first causes of everything. And I think I definitely found this a more interesting question than I realized it was going to be at first. Apparently this is a well-known dilemma in philosophy, the Euthyphro dilemma, and in religion, religious or theology as well. So it was interesting kind of poking around a little bit afterwards and seeing what other people have had to say about the Euthyphro. Yeah, definitely if it's something that, if you're interested in the topic of philosophy, it's not a bad place to start for Plato and the Socratic dialogues. Also, if I may have said Plato was talking with Euthyphro, it's Socrates that's talking with Euthyphro, if I misstated that before. I also read The Discourse on Method by Descartes, which I enjoyed a lot. It's pretty short. I read it towards the start of the year. Rene Descartes was, I guess some have called him the founder of modern philosophy, I think. Maybe I'm getting this wrong. I'd love to talk more about that, but I haven't really formed my thoughts around it yet, so I'll just leave it at that. It's a book where Descartes explores how do we know what we know, and how can we be certain about it? Should we be certain about it? Definitely interesting and foundational philosophical work, and not too incredibly obscure or challenging for people like me who don't have a lot of philosophy background. I'll also mention a few other books that I've read with Davud Gozli's reading group over the past few months, I guess. I won't talk about them too much. If you're interested, check out Davud's channel, his Patreon. But we've read some books about post-structuralism, which is something that I certainly knew very little about, and still sort of feel like I know little about, but um, at least know that I know little about it. So we read a book called Understanding Post-Structuralism by James Williams, which is really a challenging text to get started with, but kind of introduced me to some of these post-structuralist thinkers. And then we followed that up with a book, Deconstruction and Pragmatism by Chantal Mouffe, Richard Rorty, Simon Critchley, Ernesto Laclau, and Jacques Derrida. That is really a discussion between, not a discussion exactly, but it's a series of essays written, one in response to the next, as part of a collection in which they discuss pragmatism, Richard Rorty's notion of pragmatism, Derrida's notion of deconstruction, and whether that actually means anything for society, or whether it's just kind of this abstract idea in the mind that academics like to think about because they don't have anything better to do. So interesting discussion there. And then we're currently working on a more accessible book called Better Living Through Criticism by A.O. Scott, the former, actually I'm not sure, I think he might still be involved in literary criticism for the New York Times. So that's an interesting one. He explores, we're only partway through, but in that book he explores the basis of criticism, why we would do criticism. Is there really a basis of criticism? And I mean criticism in various senses of cultural productions, film, music, art, you name it, and literature, of course, since that's what this channel is about. Definitely one that I think some people, especially who are actually have made it this far in the video, are probably would find interesting. And then on the side, Davoud has he's shared some videos on his Patreon about this book, Beginning Theory by Peter Berry, which is an introduction to literary theory, which is something that I really knew nothing about before starting to participate in these reading group discussions with Davoud, but is really interesting. And I've learned, I think this particular book is definitely really accessible. It's written, I think, to be a companion text for an undergraduate course on this topic of literary theory. And really, I'm finding it not only giving me new ways of thinking about what I read, but also helping me to better understand certain discussions that I encounter about the things that I read, in which the plots or the characters or whatever is viewed through a certain critical lens or perspective, helping me understand where that comes from and what the history of all that is. Okay. To finish off, I'm going to say a few more literary, just contemporary literature, I guess. Actually, okay, one of them's not contemporary literature. Novels that I've been reading, fiction. So one book that I read recently as part of a family book club, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. Others were more mixed on it, is the book Absolution by Alice McDermott. This is the story of a woman who is a group of wives, I guess, of men working in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. Not necessarily soldiers, but people who have more corporate administrative positions. I don't really recall exactly what their husbands' positions were, because it really focuses, the center is really around the women who are there. I thought it was a really interesting and complex book in the way that these characters developed. I think this central idea of absolution is a subtle one, but to me, it evoked this sense of living in the world and finding yourself in a position of privilege or in a position where you feel that you have been dealt a better hand than other people, not because you've actively beat other people down to get there, but just feeling like that in the first place. And you can challenge to what extent this is true, to what extent does everyone have their own challenges that they face. But the women in this, not even just the women, there are some men in this book that have kind of a similar experience, but especially the women in this book really struggle with this feeling of like, you might call it white guilt, if in the context of people who are white, being in Vietnam during the midst of a devastating war. The characters try to, at least some of them really struggle with this guilt and try to like find ways to atone for it or to absolve themselves of this guilt. And well, I guess I won't say any more than that in case you want to read it. But I thought it was an enjoyable book, very accessible, well written. It doesn't have a really thick plot or a lot of, it's more of a character driven book. And I really liked it. I thought that throughout the book I was immersed in it. It was just a joy to read. I'm also currently reading one other literary fiction book that I think was a Pulitzer Prize winner and was recommended maybe a couple years ago at this point by someone on this channel, and that is the book 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley. So this book is a retelling of King Lear, of the Shakespeare play King Lear, which I did a video on, a short video on a few years ago on this channel. And I think someone commented, hey, you might really like this book, 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley. I'm about halfway through that one right now, and I'm really enjoying it. I think it'd be interesting if I hadn't read King Lear first, because I can definitely see the parallels and some of the things that maybe are parallels, but like where 1,000 Acres changes the story or questions some of the assumptions we made in King Lear. I may end up doing a full book discussion on that book because I think it's super interesting and a rich story. And yeah, things are really getting out of hand at this point in the book, since we're about 50% of the way through. So excited to see what happens next. Okay, and then finally, and this is the one that the expected completion date is the furthest in the future, I've started reading War and Peace. So I was watching a video on the channel Claire Reads Books, a channel that I really enjoy, and she was talking about how she's reading War and Peace this year as part of I don't know what it's called. Well, it's a slow read, I guess. A slow read where the goal is to take the entire year. Well, yeah, I guess the goal is to take the entire year. You don't want to finish it before the end of the year. The goal is basically to read a chapter each day, which sounds incredibly daunting and still maybe is a little bit daunting, but the chapters in this book are pretty short. Like there may be 5 pages is exactly true. But if you can imagine that War and Peace is a long book, of course, but if you can imagine that it takes a whole year to fill to complete all the chapters. There's a lot of chapters in this book. It's like hundreds of mini sections. It's more of a section than a chapter. So I was like, that sounds awesome. So I just decided, I think there's like this is a big project led by, on Simon Heisel's Substack. I don't know exactly how you pronounce his name, but he's, I think, done this before, and there's hundreds, maybe like 1,000 people participating in this. There's like a chat thread in which for each day in which people are talking about their impressions, about the characters and what's coming next. So really cool. I've been my plan is to slowly catch up with the slow read, which I guess is what's expected there, and slowly catch up maybe by the mid-year with that slow read, and then finish it on the same pace as the rest of the group. So I'm about like 20 some chapters in at this point, and really enjoying it. It's War and Peace is one of those books that I think many people feel that they want to and should read at some point, and they really do want to, but it just feels so intimidating, especially when you open the first page and a quarter of the conversation is in French. But that's a different story. So hopefully at some point in the future, I'll have a video about War and Peace as well. Anyway, hopefully some of you have made it around this far, but that's part of the experiment of trying something new. It feels strange. It feels a little uncomfortable to do a video where I feel like I'm talking about things in a very long and drawn out way, in a more spontaneous and less reflected way, where I'm saying some things that maybe I don't even fully, I haven't really fully thought out or fully agree with. But let's see if people enjoy it, and I enjoyed making it. So hopefully this is something that I'll do a little bit more often in the future. Probably not with quite as many books, if I can do it a little bit more often instead. But yeah, tell me what you've been reading lately. I'm curious what everyone else is up to, and just if you have any suggestions. Not that I can guarantee I'll read them, but as you saw in this list of books, there have been quite a few good suggestions made by people on the channel. So yeah, enjoy the spring and happy reading.